What is up, everybody? Welcome back to our podcast. My name is Chris,
And my name is James.
and we are the Formula One Bros.
Just two twins with a love of F1 to share our thoughts on everything in the world of Formula One.
And Tifosi rejoice. We finally have another victory. And once again, it comes at the hands of Carlos Sainz after a somewhat exciting Australian Grand Prix. As exciting as an Australian Grand Prix as it can be.
Yeah.
And we'll get into all of that, but it ends an 8-win streak for Max Verstappen, and Carlos Sainz is still the only person in 500 days that is not a Red Bull driver to win a Formula One race.
Yeah.
Going back to, Baku 2022, I think. Something. I don't know. No, that's too far, but going back to 2023.
Yeah, sometime in 2022, because 2023 it was the only non-Red Bull to win was Carlos. So it would have been 2022 Austria.
Well, Carlos won in 2022 in England. So it would have been after England. Anyway, regardless, Carlos Sainz has had 3 Formula One victories for Ferrari, 3 total career victories, and that is as many victories as Charles Leclerc has had in the time that Carlos Sainz has become his teammate. So lots of interesting stats. We'll go ahead and get right into it this weekend. And starting off the Australian Grand Prix weekend, started before it even really got going. And after free practice, Alex Albon crashed. And the biggest news of the weekend was that Williams had made the decision after Alex Albon's crash. They had damaged the chassis so much so that it could not be replaced, that they were going to withdraw Logan from the weekend, and Alex Albon was going to use Logan's car for the Grand Prix. I have my thoughts, but I want to get yours first.
Yeah, I just I think I know where Williams was coming from. Clearly, statistically in the past, Alex has been Logan has not gotten, or has Logan gotten a point yet?
He got 1 point.
So, but statistically, Alex has had the better history at Williams. He's gotten more points for the team, but I don't know. I think they should have just I think they should have just kept Alex out of the race. I think, granted, they couldn't have known the future because Alex didn't score a point. So it was it kind of felt like it was a wasted opportunity. It kind of felt wasted. And I personally, I feel like it should have been Logan to be in the car. Granted, I don't think he could have done much better than Alex, but still, it was Alex who was the one that crashed out. So I think it should have been Logan to have raced instead of Alex.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you're punishing you're punishing one of your drivers for the other person's mistake. And you're right. I mean, if you look at it from a statistical standpoint and a practical standpoint, if I'm a betting man and I am one of those drivers has a better opportunity to score points, it's always going to be Alex Albon, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
But, I think this kind of to me, this decision is made in a wider context at Williams, and that, James Vowles has been very open about how displeased with the way that team is run. For example, it came out in preseason, or I guess maybe after like Saudi Arabia or Bahrain, very recently, that Williams had been managing all of the parts for the Formula One cars, over 20,000 parts manufactured in-house for the Formula One cars on an Excel spreadsheet. And like, they literally didn't have enough parts to rebuild Alex Albon's chassis. They literally didn't have enough parts with them at the race to rebuild for another Formula One chassis. And that's something that most teams come with for both of their cars, like enough to completely replace. So they essentially roll up to Grand Prix with like 3 or 4 whole Formula One cars, like ready to go at any time.
Yeah,
So
I actually didn't know that they all of that was just being managed on a spreadsheet. I had no
mhm.
idea that that was the
Yep.
case.
All of the parts made in house each season were managed on an Excel spreadsheet. And James Vowles said when they made the decision that it's appalling that they don't literally do not have the resources to do this. And he said, and James Vowles said that it was like the hardest decision that he's ever had to make in his career. And I don't blame him because you don't want to do that to Logan Sargent, or you don't want to do that to any of your drivers. You really, no team principal ever wants to be put in a situation like that where they have to choose um, to withdraw one of your drivers from a weekend and punish them for a mistake that they didn't make.
Yeah.
Um, so and Alex Albon has said some things about like the morale within the team after making that decision. So all in all, I think just has exposed the almost this decision came in the context of exposing almost all of Williams's off track issues that they have had in the past that I think were baked in from previous leadership that continue to exist and that James Vowles is trying very hard to fix. So
Yeah,
I think,
maybe when James Vowles said break everything, maybe he also meant, completely restructuring the team, not just
yeah,
the car.
I don't think necessarily restructuring the team from a personnel standpoint, but
Yeah, it's from an
from an operations and
operational,
logistical perspective, like yeah, they're like overhauling the whole thing. And
which they should, because that's been the source of their trouble. It's not the fact that they can't design a car, it's the fact that they can't operate efficiently. If they were able to operate efficiently, they'd be able to make a better car
right,
and they'd be able to run as a team better.
right. And while, remember when James Vowles came in, he said that it's a team that runs itself like a Formula One team ran 20 years ago. They have literally not evolved in 2 decades. And
And that's a lot to catch up.
yeah, that's a lot to catch up, which is why he had the break everything mentality. But it also comes in the context of they almost didn't have a car ready for testing. They literally shook down the car the day before testing. So a really rough start. When all things considered, Williams is competitive. Their on track
Yeah. Hmm.
performance does not necessarily reflect their off track performance, but you know which is good, which means they're heading in the right direction, operationally on track, and from a pace perspective, they're up there competing. The problem is now, I think Haas is faster than them now, and Haas has made a big step, and
Hmm.
teams around them are making big steps, and you know it's now not a question of whether they can be competitive; it's can they keep up.
Yeah.
So I think this whole thing this weekend for Williams comes in the context of them trying to overhaul what they've done in the past. And also, you know, if not managed properly, could really set them up for a very long season this year.
Yeah. I think though, with how far behind they are just operationally as a team, like you said, they're like they haven't overhauled anything in 2 decades. Um, and back in 2004, I mean, they were right up there competing with Ferrari. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you had drivers like Juan Pablo Montoya,
Yep.
but those days are long gone. And I think it's going to take a lot of there are going to be a ton of growing pains. And I think much like what we said might happen with Haas, with the new leadership coming in at Haas, it may get worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
But the fact that these things are happening and there are growing pains, it does make me feel like, I mean, hey, while they are making mistakes, there are things that they're doing poorly. Knowing James, they're they're taking notes and they're learning so
Mm-hmm.
much about how to become a better team. And with the leadership of James Vowles, I think it's going to be uncomfortable, and this season might be a very long season for them. But I think ultimately at the end of the season, they'll be in a better place as a team than when they were at the start of the season.
Right.
So they're off to a rough start, but I think there's a lot that they're going to learn this season, which is a good thing.
Yeah, and this season, and it's also not just about this season too, right?
Mhm.
We have new regulations coming in 2 years, so
I
I
know
think
that they're
James Vowles is
targeting that.
yeah, they're playing the long game, right? I think all teams are, but especially Williams, they're in a position where they have to be playing the long game. If they want a chance to be competitive going into 2026, and every rules regulation that changes in the past, I would say past 10 years of F1, every rule change bakes in an inherent um pecking order that doesn't change very much, if at all, throughout the course of that rule cycle. And it's now more than ever because of the cost cap. Um, and it's another reason why I think so far, other than some drama in Australia, the first two races of the season haven't been particularly interesting because the pecking order has been widely unchanged from last year, and that's because of the rule cycle. But we could go on and on. But let's move on from Williams. And you mentioned Haas earlier, and it was a
Mhm.
good double points weekend for Haas.
Yes, it was such a good weekend for Haas. I'm so happy for them. I can't remember the last time that they've had both cars in the points. It was such a good
Yep.
weekend for them. They look they look really strong, and I know we'll get into this later, but we both predicted them to finish 10th in the
Mhm.
constructors, and right now they do not look like the slowest team on the track.
No, right now they're in, I believe they're in like sixth or seventh.
Yeah, so
Um,
they look really strong, and this was a great weekend for them. This was the weekend that they needed for
yeah.
sure.
And I think what's even more is you saw during the race that there were a lot of people, particularly I think Charles in his first hard tire stint, his second stint, and the Mercedes that were complaining about it a lot too of graining because Albert Park is a street circuit. It's not like Jeddah at all where it's very smooth and purpose built. It's a street track, and there was a lot of graining and people were suffering with tire wear issues. And I think the way that Haas maintained their competitive edge, not just throughout stint to stint, but throughout the entire race, was incredible. We didn't see the traditional Haas qualify really well and then fall back. They were hanging tough. They were being competitive. And granted, the double points came from some misfortune from some other people. But um,
That's
it
the business, baby.
yeah, that's the way it goes. You have to be able to put yourself. I don't believe in luck in Formula One. Like they didn't luck into a double points finish. They put themselves in that team has put themselves in a position to um pick up the pieces from other people's mistakes. That is the hallmark of a great Formula One team. And Haas did that, and they picked up the points when George Russell and Lewis Hamilton didn't finish the race, when Max Verstappen didn't finish the race. They were there to collect those points.
Yeah.
And so the
And
and
even if all three of those drivers had finished, they still would have been, what they finished ninth and 10th. They still would
Yeah,
have been probably 11th and 12th had those drivers still finished. So like that's still very respectable. But yeah, I mean, being able to capitalize, put yourself in a position to capitalize on others' misfortune, that's the business,
yeah.
It's not like, oh, they got lucky, haha, that'll never happen again. But like being able to put yourself in that position is a skill in and of itself. And that you're right, that is a hallmark of a good F1 team.
Yeah, and so the way that they were able to manage their tires throughout the race and be competitive, they were competitive throughout the entire race. That car looked competitive through the entire race. And I think Albert Park, with the rough track surface that they had, I think for using Jeddah as an outlier and looking at Bahrain and Albert Park as two tracks with really rough surfaces, and they performed very comparable to each other in both of those races. I think we're starting to get a very confirmed picture that Haas has, at least most of the way, maybe not 100%, but most of the way, gotten on top of their tire wear problems. And
Yeah.
I'm confident that that team is heading in the right direction.
Yeah. And
I'm
I
very
think
confident.
that comes a lot from also Ferrari. And I'm sure you probably noticed their
Mhm.
tire wear situation is so much better this year.
Right.
So it's really good to see both those teams succeeding. But yeah, it's so nice to see Haas finally going back in the right direction. I
Yeah.
miss the days where, in 2018, where they were able to qualify up in the top 10 regularly and finish in the points
Mhm.
regularly. And, even Roman Grosjean finishing, fourth in France.
Well, and then in Belgium in 2018, with both of them finishing fourth and fifth.
Yeah, so it's going to take a lot to get back there, but they're definitely on the right track, and it's just so nice to see them. They've come so far from where they were in 2020 and 2021.
Yeah.
So far.
Yep. Well, that's Williams, that's Haas, and I think it's important to talk about them equally, because it's important to talk about them together, because I think they are direct competitors. They are competing for top of the midfield, I think, right now. Because you have the front four, and then you have like Aston and RB, and then at that back group is being led by Williams and Haas, and I think they're going to be competing for that seventh place. And they are right now, and so yeah, it's good to see. It's good to see not only Haas being up there, but and being competitive, but all of them being competitive.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. I
But
mean, all the teams, kick, Alpine looked strong this weekend too.
Alpine has looked much stronger. I think Pierre Gasly said that they're still going to need some major upgrades to be competitive, ready for points. But I think Bahrain over exaggerated some of their weaknesses. I think,
And that typically happens at Bahrain. Bahrain is
yeah,
one of those tracks. It makes good cars look great, and it makes
mhm,
bad cars look so horrendous.
yeah, yeah. The spread, the time spread between teams is always much greater. I think this weekend was a good representation. I think in 2 weeks in Suzuka is going to be another good representation of where Alpine are truly at, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yep.
If they have a representative weekend, without any, DNFs or anything. But going kind of back to the race a little bit, the big story obviously was Max Verstappen retiring from the
Yeah,
race.
that was definitely not something that I had in my bingo card for the entire 2024 season. I just the way the first two races went, and the way testing went, and everything surrounding Red Bull, I thought that car was invincible, and I thought we're never going to see it, like a single retirement from that team.
Yep.
And sure enough, the right rear brake just explodes, and
Yeah.
so I'm sure that that's just one probably faulty part. I don't think that I personally don't think that this is going to be a regular thing like we saw from Ferrari in 2022. I don't think that this is going to be a regular thing. I think this was just a one time, oh crap. But even shortly after Max retired, Checo said that he was dealing with the same issue. He felt like the car was really loose, felt
Mhm.
like there was a lot of oversteer coming from the same area of the car. So yeah, that was crazy when
Yeah.
I remember when it first it's so the race started for non-American people who listened. For us over here in the East Coast, the race started at midnight,
Mhm.
and so I was like kind of groggy. I was like tired, and I think both of us had the same. We were talking before this started. We both had the same reaction when Max retired. We were like, "Am I just tired, or is this like real?
Yeah,
Is this
right,
actually
exactly. Like
happening?
I
Am
didn't
I
I
just
was
in? Am I dreaming right now? Am I actually asleep, or is this like real life
yeah,
right
there
now?"
was there was a part of me that was not really fully able to comprehend what had happened. So, and apparently
It woke me right up.
yeah, and apparently it from what Max and the team had said after the race, that it came from just and it started on the grid, like when they were on the grid after the formation lap and they were holding the brakes down, getting ready to launch, the brake stuck, and it didn't disengage. So the all of the first 3 laps, his right rear brake was just stuck on and overheating and overheating and overheating. Which is why I think part of the reason why it was so easy for Carlos to get by on, what was that, lap 2?
Yeah, it
Able
was
to get by
this.
on lap 2 down the
Yeah,
back
it
stretch
was lap
ahead of
two.
turn 9.
Yeah, he used DRS to do, which I was confused by that. I was like, how is Carlos so much faster than Max right
Yeah.
now?
And then he started smoking and ended up in the pits. And then the pit entry, the way that brake exploded, was, I had never seen anything like that in Formula One. But it
Not
was wild.
recently, no.
No. And yeah, and I think the Checo, I think I there have been I think I'd heard Crofty like say at one point during the race, like wondering, putting it out there whether or not Checo was dealing with the same issue. And, I was in and out of sleep at that point. So I can't really remember but what I noticed is when he was going, he had a really good pace. And then as soon as he got by Fernando Alonso after the last pit stop, his pace completely stalled. And which tells me I believe they were probably just managing the issue and just trying to get the car home. If there was an issue, it seems to me that they were managing. They were trying to get that car home. They were not trying to chase down the McLarens. They were not trying to chase down the Ferraris. They got past Fernando Alonso and the pace completely stalled. So was there an issue on that car? I don't know, but we go back to 2022, and we talked about this morning. We go back to 2022, and you called it the first race curse. Ferrari wins the first race with 1-2. Second race, I think Max won, but it was in a really tight battle with Leclerc. It came down to the final lap. Third race of the season, Charles Leclerc grand slams in Australia. Then we rock up to Baku, and Ferrari season completely unraveled. And that's when we started having the reliability issues. They turned down the engine to save from reliability, and Red Bull ran away with the season after that. And is that going to happen with Red Bull? I doubt
Probably
it.
not. I doubt it. Granted, we did say that about Ferrari.
Right. But it is interesting. It is something that we're going to have to keep an eye on. Right. And then what happened in 2023 was Ferrari had mechanical problems at the beginning of the season. And we were like, oh, turned in. No, then it did not end up happening. But yeah, it'll just be interesting to see if this problem manifests itself. We were talking like, is this going to be like a 2022 situation? I actually see this season very much like 2020. If you go back to 2020, and it was basically like, Mercedes had the W20, which is widely regarded as the most dominant car ever created, aside from now the RB19. And at the time it was incredibly dominant, and it was basically like Mercedes 1-2 every weekend, and Max Verstappen in the Red Bull was able to pick up a couple podiums and win, or was on podium by default because he was just the next fastest driver in the next fastest team, and was able to pick up a couple wins that season when Mercedes had some off weekends, like the 70th anniversary Grand Prix when he won in England. And so I see that season more like that. It's going to kind of be like a Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez RB20 show, and it's going to be one of the Ferraris going to kind of be on the podium. It just kind of seems how it's going to go right now, and Ferrari's going to be able to pick up the pieces when Red Bull doesn't execute as well, or has some tracks that maybe don't favor the car as much, which looked like it was going to be Albert Park. And which kind of leads me to my next point. I think had Max Verstappen finished the race, it was going to be much closer than we had seen in Jeddah and in Bahrain. It was. I think it was going to be much closer.
100%. I totally agree. It definitely would have been a lot closer, which would have been refreshing. But another thing I want to mention about the race, once Max did retire, it was cool. I think I tweeted something. It was cool watching a race in Albert Park, and the top two teams battling were Ferrari and McLaren.
Yeah.
It brought me back to like when we were kids and would stay up super late or wake up super early, and it was Ferrari and McLaren. Like, especially in like the 2005 to 2004, 2005, 2006, or Renault, but McLaren was always in the mix there. So it was really, really cool to see that battle. And yeah, it was really fun to watch.
Yeah. So yeah, I totally agree. And I think another thing that I'll mention about that is it seems to me that this was Ferrari's weekend to say emphatically, we are the second fastest team.
Oh yeah,
definitely. We are the closest thing to Red Bull. I still think McLaren has a little bit of time to gain definitely to catch up for Red Bull, but also to Ferrari. But this was also McLaren's weekend to say we are the third fastest team.
Yeah, it's
We're
definitely
we are beating Aston Martin. We are beating Mercedes. We like, and Ferrari were coming for you. And the way that Lando was able to hang with Charles throughout the race, like they were trading fastest laps back and forth, in the
right at the end. Yeah.
in the second stint, Lando Norris was the fastest car on track. And in the third stint, it was Charles Leclerc. Fast, they were trading fastest laps back and forth. Oscar Piastri was not far behind Lando, and Lando was only a couple seconds off Charles. So
Mhm.
I think the way that they finished is the way that they're in, is the order in which they are in terms of pace behind Red Bull. Um, I think the gap to Red Bull is not as big as we thought it was after Bahrain and Jeddah.
Yeah, because I mean, like we talked about that. I mean, Bahrain and Jeddah are the type of tracks that make the really good cars look better and the
Mhm.
not so good cars look worse.
Yep.
And this was a lot more of a good showing of where the cars actually are. And Red Bull looked beatable even before Max had retired. They looked beatable this weekend. It was the
Yeah.
first time in like a year that they've looked beatable.
Yep. Yeah, totally. I mean, aside from Singapore, and I think the problems that Red Bull faced in Singapore were the same type of problems that they showed up here, just not able to get to grips with their setup, having some handling problems. And because technically Albert Park is a street circuit. So I think emphatically Red Bull is fastest. Ferrari is emphatically second, not as far off as we all thought that they were. McLaren is also emphatically third, but chasing Ferrari and is much closer than I think we initially thought, and much further ahead of others than we thought. And I have to say, I think Aston Martin is the fourth fastest team. Mercedes, this is going to be a weekend that they want to forget. Aside from the DNFs, but Lewis Hamilton qualified 11th.
He just could not get a handle of his car at all. So, yeah, it was not a good weekend for Mercedes.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, and they did DNF, a very rare mechanical problem for Mercedes. I think ever since really ever since 2017, Mercedes is not a team that has mechanical failures. I think they solved a lot of the reliability issues that um came from the very beginning of the turbo hybrid era. In 2017, they moved on and they've created freak of nature cars that are super reliable and just don't retire. So it was a very rare mechanical issue for Mercedes. So very unfortunate, but Lewis Hamilton was fighting to hang into the points. It was that dire of a situation, and George was fighting for what, sixth at the end with
Yeah.
Fernando Alonso, and
Yeah, and he was behind Fernando.
Yep. So I think Aston Martin is emphatically fourth. I think Mercedes is the fifth fastest team, and then
I
I
think
think
Aston Martin and Mercedes are still really close to each other, though.
I think they are close.
I think Aston Martin has the edge over Mercedes, but they're really close though.
Mhm. And I think it's going to swing track to track. Like there are going to be tracks where Aston Martin doesn't do well, where Mercedes does, and there are going to be tracks like Albert Park where Aston Martin does better than Mercedes. And I think it's going to be back and forth between them for a while. Again, the pendulum may swing, when we go to Suzuka. So, um, and then I think after that, I think RB would probably be my pick for sixth fastest. And then it's like, I still think it's Haas, Williams, Kick, Sauber, whatever, and then Alpine at the back.
Yeah, I would definitely agree, but it's good because going back again to our predictions preseason, we both said that Haas would be the 10th fastest team, and they're clearly not, which
They're
is
clearly not.
really, really cool.
Yeah.
Of all of the predictions to get wrong, I'm glad we got that one wrong.
Yeah. I'm
I'm
glad
really
that,
glad.
and I'm glad that we got that wrong. And I will say this every single weekend. I said it after Saudi Arabia. I definitely said it after Bahrain, and I will continue to say it as long as Alpine is the slowest car on track. It is embarrassing that Formula One have um a works team that is the slowest team, but are denying Andretti entry into Formula One. Because they're, one of the reasons cited is that they're going to be a customer team and they're not going to be a works team. And I think Formula One and its teams should be embarrassed. I think Alpine should be
Isn't
embarrassed.
Audi going to be a customer team too? Like,
Audi's going to be a works team.
oh, they're going to be a
Audi
works
is
team. Oh,
Audi is
because
going to be a
technically
works team.
Kick Sauber is a works team, not a customer team.
Well, they're a customer team of Ferrari.
Oh.
Sauber is a customer team of Ferrari.
Oh, so
But
once
Audi
takes over, they're going to make their own parts.
Audi is going to be making their own engine.
Watch, they're going to be the slowest.
But watch, they're going to be the fastest. But yeah, that's a whole conversation for a different day. But yeah, I think the only other thing that one stat that I would like to mention is the last time that Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton didn't finish a Formula One race, 2021 Italian Grand Prix, when Max Verstappen ended up on top of Lewis Hamilton. And when they crashed out, that was the last time that neither Hamilton and that both Hamilton and Verstappen did not finish a race. Was Italy 2021.
Wow, that was 3 years ago. That's crazy that season was 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Formula One was a very different place back then.
Yeah, that's crazy. Another one that I texted you and Spencer. What was exactly the text message that I said? It was something like the last time that a team finished 1-2 in Austria, or every single time, every year, that since we've been racing at Albert Park, what was it? Here's the text. Every year a team has gone to finish 1-2 in Australia. They've gone on to win both championships every single year. The last team that went 1-2 in Australia was 2019.
And that was Mercedes.
Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton were both drivers at Mercedes. It was Mercedes going 1-2. I think it was Valtteri who won that race.
It was.
Yeah, I think it was Valtteri who won. Lewis came in second.
A half a minute.
Yeah. And they went on to win both championships. And every year that they've raced at Albert Park, I don't know if that's an Albert Park stat or just Australia in general. I think that's an Albert Park stat.
I believe that's an Albert Park stat.
But they've been racing Albert Park for a long time.
Well, and I say that's an Albert Park stat because Albert Park, when it took over for Adelaide as the Australian Grand Prix, Adelaide was the last round of the championship. And when Melbourne came in, they started becoming the first round. So that stat is built around Melbourne, Albert Park being the first race of the year. So they likely did not include stats from Adelaide.
Yeah, so that it's probably so that would be an Albert Park stat, but still every year and they've been racing at Albert Park since the late 90s or the early 2000s.
Late 90s. I want to say the last time that they raced in Adelaide was, I want to say 1990. I think 91 was the first Australian Grand Prix.
Let's see, Albert Park Circuit. I'm Googling it. Let's go into the Wikipedia. 1996.
96. Okay.
So yeah. they've been racing 96. At Albert Park since
I knew
96.
It was sometime in the 90s. Yeah. So is that going to happen with Ferrari? I think that stat is going to be a little bit more precarious now because we have a 24 race season compared to, 18 or 19 races. So we have more races. I think the competitive outlook is a lot closer this year than it was in 2019. So will that happen? I doubt it, but who knows?
Yeah, I highly doubt it. With how good Red Bull is, I highly doubt that Ferrari is going to win both championships this year. But we said that about Ferrari in 2022.
Yeah, but here's the thing too: is now both championships are now within 4 points. Charles is 4 points behind Max in the Drivers' Championship, and Ferrari is 4 points behind Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship. Now we're going to a track where in Suzuka, where Red Bull has done very well.
They've
And
been running well there since
yeah, I think
like 2010.
we're going to a couple tracks coming up with that Red Bull has done really well. I mean, the last time with Suzuka and Japan and Baku, we're going to start going to some races where Red Bull are going to do really well. So, will it happen? I don't know. But yeah, that's an interesting stat. So, I think overall thoughts, conclusions, final reactions of the 2024 Australian Grand Prix.
Yeah.
Take it away, James.
So I would say in terms of the grand scheme of things in all of Formula One, I don't think it was necessarily the most exciting race. But in terms of Australia, I think it was one of the more exciting Australia Formula One races that we've seen. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Mhm.
I didn't really enjoy last season of Formula One, and haven't really enjoyed the first two races, because we all know who's going to win every single race. And when you
Right.
know who's going to win the race before it even starts, it kind of takes away some of the excitement of it. But as soon as Max retired, I was like, this is Ferrari's race. Like this,
Mhm.
I was like, it could even be McLaren's race because they were hanging right with Ferrari
Yeah.
with the first couple laps. And I was like, we could have a battle on our hands. And
Yeah.
it wasn't a runaway.
No, it
Carlos
wasn't.
Carlos only finished a couple seconds ahead of Charles by the time the virtual safety car came out. And Lando and Oscar were only a couple seconds behind Charles. So it was a really close finish. And it was because of that, it was exciting. I wasn't, even though it was midnight, I wasn't like falling asleep halfway through the race because it was boring. Like
Right.
I genuinely liked this race, and I thought it was awesome. I loved it. I
Yeah, it was
hate that
great.
it came from, you know, being happy that a person retired, because I don't want that to happen. But in a perfect world, it's going to be super, super, super competitive, even without people retiring. But yeah, it was really entertaining. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been the most entertaining race of the season so far, and as I think as good as Australia can get, even though now we have 4 DRS zones, and we took out that really awkward chicane, and the track has changed and been reprofiled, which has made the racing so much better, and it's been great. But yeah, not an all-time classic. I think still indicative of kind of where the competitive edge is, that we have some sort of exciting race because the misfortune of one team and one driver, with Max retiring from the race. But I think Red Bull showed a little bit this week that they're vulnerable. Not that I think they're going to lose the champ. Nothing that has told me that they're going to lose the championship, but they're vulnerable.
It's going to be a lot closer of a battle than I think we anticipated,
Yeah.
which is an exciting prospect.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'll say too is, throughout the entirety of the race, this was Ferrari's race to lose, and I kept waiting for the moment that they were going to screw it up
And
because
they
they
didn't.
had so many times in the past, and they didn't. And I think that this team, and I posted something on Twitter that basically said the same thing. I think this team is starting to be the fully realized Fred Vasseur Ferrari. They're operating at not a very high level, but a very consistent level. Consistency,
And efficient.
yeah. They're efficient and they're consistent. Consistency, and we talk about this with like NASCAR. This is a big thing in NASCAR. Consistency wins championships. Not being the fastest, but consistency wins championships. And if they are operating at a very consistent level, I think we're finally starting to see the Fred Vasseur effect. And we're finally starting to see what Ferrari looks like under Fred Vasseur. And I think the other great thing about it is because this is only Fred's second season as team principal. If he stays on for a long period of time, this could be the very beginning of something amazing for Ferrari. So I was pleasantly surprised at every single moment. Every single pit stop was great. The strategy was great. There was no plan F or whatever. It was after, Max retired at the end of the stint, it was both cars plan A. They had planned out that, Carlos was going to go long and Charles was going to pit early to split the strategy, make it hard for the McLarens. That's exactly what they did. They came out with a 1-2. At no point, during the race did I think, oh yeah, they just bottled this race. No, they operated on a very high level, and they have been the entire season so far. They've been very consistent. No high profile mistakes with that team, and the fruit that it bears is being able to stand on the top step of the podium when Red Bull have an off weekend. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. So good job Ferrari, and good job McLaren too. They looked quick. They look like, I know we said that at the start of this year, one of our predictions was that they're going to be able to pick back up where they left off and improve throughout the season. And so far they have. They're very emphatically the third fastest team, and they look really, really good.
Yeah. And it's, we've seen, I think ever since really like 2019, because McLaren had a really rough start to 2019, but it ended with Carlos getting podium in Brazil. And picking up, what was it, like 16 positions in the race that day?
Yeah, something like that.
He had
it was
an
ridiculous
insane day, and it went from like the start of 2019 that they had to then, and they have this pattern of starting seasons really rocky and then ending them really, really well. And I think, we talked about this in preseason, that their secret to success this year would hinge upon having a really good start to the season.
And so far they've done that.
Exactly. Yeah, I think they're on the right path. And if this is the rough start for McLaren,
oh boy,
the end of the season is going to be wild. It's going to be crazy. And if this is the rough start that McLaren is having, I see Lando winning a first race this year. I think that's very much on the cards.
And that the possibility of that happening is making me so incredibly happy right now.
Yeah, dude. Oh my God. I would love to see Lando Norris on the top step of the podium. I don't think there's going to be a Formula One fan out there in existence that is not going to enjoy that. So
I would agree.
That is just about all the time we have for today for our Australian Grand Prix review. We'll be coming back with you. We have another off weekend before coming to before the Formula One circus rocks up to Japan. So we will have another episode in a week's time, but enjoy your week. We are going to go watch the JMU Dukes in a very rare appearance in the NCAA tournament. So we're going to go watch our team.
Time to go watch some basketball.
We will be back with you next week.